When the check finally cleared, Ethan Shaw used it to buy that abandoned farmhouse for $15,000. It was his last $15,000 on Earth. He wasn't just buying rotting timbers and overgrown land. He thought he was buying a second chance. He envisioned it as a place to rebuild, a solid foundation for his 5-year-old daughter, Clara, after the ground had fallen out from beneath him, after they'd lost everything that mattered. But when he returned 6 weeks later, pulling a U-Haul trailer that held the scraps of their former life, ready to dig in and start over, he found a thin plume of gray smoke rising from the stone chimney. And inside the home that was supposed to save them, he found 2 strangers. What happened in the next hour would change all 4 of their lives forever. But first, you have to decide. Do you call the police, or do you take a leap of faith that defies all logic? Before we continue, please tell us, where in the world are you tuning in from? We love seeing just how far our stories can travel. The gravel crunched under the tires, a sharp, scattering sound in the quiet, as Ethan turned the truck down the long, rutted driveway. Dusk was settling heavy over the Oregon countryside, painting the rolling hills in deep shades of purple and bruised gold. He'd been driving for 5 hours straight from Portland, and every muscle in his body burned with a dull, weary ache. But none of that mattered now. This was it, their new beginning. "Is that it, Daddy?" Clara's voice was bright with a child's pure excitement from the passenger seat, her face pressed close to the glass. "Is that our house?" Ethan managed a smile, weariness etched into the corners of his eyes. "That's it, sweetheart. That's—" He stopped mid-sentence. His hands didn't just tighten on the steering wheel. They gripped it until his knuckles turned white. Smoke. There was smoke rising from the chimney. His heart didn't just hammer. It threatened to burst from his chest, a frantic bird trapped against his ribs. He slammed the truck to a stop about 20 feet from the house, the sudden halt jostling Clara in her seat. The farmhouse looked exactly as he'd remembered from his brief, desperate inspection 6 weeks ago. Weathered white paint peeling like sunburn, a front porch that sagged under its own weight, weeds reclaiming the yard with wild abandon. But someone had been here. Someone was inside. "Daddy!" Clara's voice was small now, uncertain. The excitement had vanished. "Why did we stop?" "Stay in the truck, Clara." Ethan's voice came out sharper, rougher than he'd intended. He saw her flinch and instantly softened it. "Just for a minute, okay? Let me check something. But stay here. Lock the door behind me." He squeezed her hand, a reassurance that felt false, then opened the door and stepped out. The evening air was cold, biting at his face. He could smell the distinct, sharp scent of wood smoke now, definitely coming from inside. His mind raced, cycling through possibilities, each one worse than the last. Squatters, vandals, maybe some local kids using the empty shell as a party spot. He approached the front door slowly, his shoulders tense, his contractor's instincts on high alert, scanning for broken entry points, for danger. The door was slightly ajar. Ethan pushed it open with the toe of his boot, and his breath caught in his throat. The main room. It had been swept clean. Years of dust and leaves were gone. A fire crackled warmly in the massive stone fireplace, the same fireplace he'd assumed was clogged and useless. 2 young women stood frozen in the center of the room, their eyes wide with sheer terror. They looked identical, mirror images of exhaustion and fear. Same slight build, same long, pale blonde hair pulled back in matching ponytails. Same dirt smudged across high cheekbones. For a long, stretched-out moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then one of them stepped forward, her hands raised halfway, a gesture of surrender. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Please don't call the police. We'll leave. We'll leave right now. We just needed somewhere warm." "Who are you?" Ethan's voice was harder than he felt, a defense mechanism. His mind was spinning, trying to reconcile the threat he'd expected with the terrified women he'd found. These weren't vandals. They looked like hunted animals. The other twin moved protectively, shifting just slightly in front of her sister. "We're sorry. We thought this place was abandoned. We've only been here for a few weeks. We haven't damaged anything, I swear to you. We'll pack up and go. Just please don't call the cops." Ethan's gaze swept around the room more carefully now, his builder's eye taking in the details. The floor hadn't just been swept, it had been scrubbed. The broken window panes were covered with cardboard and clear plastic, sealed tight against the encroaching cold. Someone had cleared out years of debris, old newspapers, nests, and trash. The fireplace wasn't just working, it was clean, like they'd actually taken the time to check the flue and make it safe. "How did you even know about this house?" he asked, his voice a low growl. The first twin, the one who'd spoken, wrapped her arms around herself. She looked young, maybe early 20s, but with eyes that had seen too much. "We used to live in Ashford, about 10 miles from here. Everyone knew this place had been empty for years. We didn't think anyone would. We didn't know someone bought it." "Daddy!" All three of them turned, startled. Clara stood in the open doorway, clutching her stuffed rabbit by one ear, her brown curls wild around her small face. She looked at the two women not with fear, but with wide-eyed, open curiosity. "Clara, I told you to stay in the truck." Ethan moved toward her instinctively, wanting to shield her. "I know, but it's really cold and I saw the smoke, and I thought maybe we could have a fire too." She tilted her head, her gaze fixed on the twins. "Are these ladies going to live with us?" The question hung in the air, thick and heavy as the smoke itself. "No, sweetheart. We're leaving," one of the twins said quickly, her voice strained. "We're really sorry. We'll be gone in 10 minutes. But Clara had already walked further into the room, drawn by the heat, her small hand reaching out to feel the fire's warmth. "It's nice in here. Way better than the truck." She looked up at her father, her expression serious. "Can they show us how they made the fire work? You said the fireplace was broken." Ethan felt something crack open and shift deep inside his chest. He looked at his daughter, this resilient little girl who'd lost her mother, Rebecca, 8 months ago. This child who'd slept in a sterile motel room for weeks, who'd watched their entire life get tagged, auctioned, and sold piece by piece, standing there offering such simple, uncomplicated kindness. Then he looked at the two young women. Really looked at them. They were terrified, yes, but not just of him. It was something deeper, a bone-deep dread. He recognized it because he'd seen it staring back at him from his own mirror for months. The kind of soul-crushing fear that comes from having nowhere left to go and no one left to turn to. "Sit down," he said quietly. The twins exchanged a panicked glance. "Please," Ethan added, his voice softer. "Just sit. Let's figure this out." 20 minutes later, they were all sitting around the fire. Clara had curled up against Ethan's side, fighting sleep but determined to stay awake for whatever happened next. The twins sat across from them, perched on the edge of an old crate, poised as if they might need to run at any moment. "I'm Hazel," one of them said softly. "This is my sister, Ivy. We're twins. Obviously." "Obviously," Clara murmured sleepily from the safety of her father's arm. And despite everything, a small, sad smile touched Hazel's lips. "I'm Ethan. This is Clara." He paused, the warmth of the fire doing nothing to stop the cold knot in his stomach. "Tell me how you ended up here." The twins looked at each other in that silent, instantaneous way that twins do, a whole conversation passing between them in a single glance. Then Ivy, the one who had seemed more protective, spoke. "We grew up in Ashford, just the three of us, me, Hazel, and our mom, Susan. Our dad left when we were babies, so Mom raised us alone. She worked 2, sometimes 3, jobs most of our lives." Ivy's voice was steady, but her hands were clasped so tight in her lap, her knuckles were white. "We both got scholarships to Oregon State, full rides. Agricultural science for Hazel, business for me. Mom was so proud." Hazel picked up the thread, her voice barely above a whisper. "We graduated last June. Everything was perfect. We had job offers, plans. Then in August, Mom had an accident at work. A machine malfunctioned at the processing plant where she worked nights. Something about a safety guard that wasn't maintained properly." Her voice dropped. "She survived, but her spine was damaged." Ethan felt Clara's weight grow heavier against him as she finally drifted toward sleep. He shifted her gently, his gaze locked on Hazel, listening. "We came home to take care of her," Ivy continued. "Turned down the job offers, We thought, we thought it would be temporary, that she'd heal, that the company's insurance would cover it. She let out a short, bitter laugh that held no humor. We were so naive. The company fought the claim. They blamed her for the accident, said she violated safety protocol. Meanwhile, Mom's medical bills just kept piling up. We worked 3 jobs between us. I was at the feed store and helping with harvest work. Ivy waitressed at the corner cafe and did bookkeeping for some local businesses. But it wasn't enough. Ivy's voice cracked, the steady facade crumbling. Mom's condition got worse in October. An infection, complications. She spent a week in the ICU. She died on October 23rd. The fire crackled loudly in the devastating silence that followed. "We're sorry," Ethan said quietly. The words felt small and useless. Hazel wiped her eyes quickly, angrily. The medical debt was over $80,000. The collectors came after everything. Our mom's house, our car, anything with value. We tried to fight it, but we didn't understand the legal system. We didn't have money for lawyers. By December, we had nothing left. We were sleeping in our car. Then the car broke down, and we couldn't afford to fix it. Someone at the diner mentioned this farmhouse, said it had been abandoned for years. We thought maybe just for a few weeks, just until we could save enough for first and last month's rent somewhere. But everywhere requires an address, references, proof of employment. It's hard to get any of that when you're homeless. We've been applying for jobs, but it's a cycle we can't break out of. Kichu, Chao Ban, to se thiep tuk viet life tu hai, kua kao chue, but jao tu joan ethan nahi, he chiem van han rasu tung jong trong hoa kan kua ho, kwang zor nain zorons. Cho jen joan mota kong viet skin, doan pu kua ivy bart jao fat trien, kwang chordi or ounds. Toi se thiep tuk su dung kach ten jon thong hat. Ethan, Clara, Hazel, Ivy, Rebecca, Susan, Ashford, Portland, the corner cafe, Va Turner's Hardware. Ethan looked at them, truly looked past the grime and the fear. These were 2 young women who had done everything right. They'd studied hard, earned scholarships, graduated college, and then put their own futures on hold to care for their dying mother, only to have the foundation of their entire world ripped away through no fault of their own. He knew that story. He was living a carbon copy of it. "How old are you?" he asked, his voice softer now. 24, they said in perfect, quiet unison. Clara had fallen fully asleep against his chest, her breathing soft and even, a small, warm weight of trust. Ethan looked down at his daughter's peaceful face, a face untouched by the shame that had eaten him alive. Then he looked back at the twins. He thought about the sterile, bleach-smelling motel room where they'd spent those awful hollow weeks. He thought about the crushing, public shame of the foreclosure auction. He thought about the morning he'd sat in his truck, the engine off, and sold Rebecca's jewelry, the last physical pieces of her he had, just to buy groceries and gas. He thought about the desperate, clawing, 3 a.m. feeling of having nowhere to turn, and no one, not a single person, who truly understood. These girls had lost their mother, he'd lost his wife, they'd lost their home. So had he. They were trying to rebuild from absolute zero. So was he. "How long have you been here?" he asked. 3 weeks, Hazel said. We've been really careful. We haven't damaged anything. We clean every day. We only use the fireplace at night when we thought nobody would see the smoke." Her eyes flickered to the truck in the driveway. "Or we thought nobody would see it anyway. The cardboard on the windows." "That was your work?" Ivy nodded. "We found some plastic sheeting in the barn. It keeps the wind out, mostly." "And you cleaned the fireplace," Ethan stated, not a question. "Made it safe to use." "Hazel did that," Ivy said, a flicker of pride in her voice. "She's good with her hands. She checked the flue, cleared out all the debris, made sure it wasn't going to catch fire or smoke us out." Ethan looked at Hazel with a new professional interest. "You know construction?" She shook her head quickly. "Not really, but I'm good at figuring things out. I helped build sets for our high school theater program, did some farm repair work during college summers. I learned fast." Something was taking shape in Ethan's mind. It was a half-formed, desperate idea. It was probably crazy. It was definitely not practical. But then again, neither was buying an abandoned farmhouse with your last $15,000. This place, he said slowly, his voice echoing in the sparse room, it needs a lot of work. The roof leaks in at least 3 places. The plumbing is shot, completely gone. Half the electrical needs to be ripped out and rewired. The floors, he scuffed his boot, they need sanding, refinishing. It's going to take months to make it actually livable. The twins nodded, their faces pale and confused, clearly wondering where he was going with this. I'm a contractor, he said. Or I was. I owned a restoration company back in Portland. Lost it 8 months ago, along with everything else. That's why I bought this place. It was all I could afford, a chance to start over. For me and for Clara. He took a deep breath, the cold air filling his lungs. This was the leap. Here's what I'm thinking. I need help fixing this place up. I can't pay you much, barely anything at first. But if you help me with the work, you can stay. We'll figure out the sleeping arrangements. We'll get the utilities turned on properly. We'll make it work. You learn construction skills. I get the labor I desperately need. And Clara, he glanced down at his sleeping daughter, her face serene. She gets people around besides just me. She needs that. The silence that followed was absolute, heavier than before. Are you serious? Ivy's voice was barely a whisper, afraid the words themselves would break the spell. I'm serious, Ethan said, but there are rules. We're honest with each other. Always, no secrets. We all pull our weight, and we figure this out together as we go. Deal? Hazel's eyes instantly filled with tears that spilled over and ran down her dirty cheeks. Why? Why would you do this? You don't even know us. Ethan thought about that question. He thought about the blinding, fluorescent lights of the hospital hallway. He thought about signing the foreclosure papers, his hands shaking. He thought about the motel manager's pitying look when he paid for another week with a handful of crumpled bills. Because 6 months ago, he said, his voice thick with a memory that was still raw, I would have done anything, for someone to give me a chance. So I'm giving you one. That's what broke Ivy. She stood up abruptly and turned away, her shoulders shaking in a silent, violent sob. Hazel immediately moved to her sister's side, wrapping her arms around her. Ethan heard Ivy's quiet, choked sobs of relief and despair. Thank you, Hazel said, her own voice trembling with emotion. You won't regret this. Thank you. Ethan nodded, shifting Clara's weight in his arms. Get some sleep, both of you. Tomorrow we start figuring out what this place needs. It's going to be a lot of work. Hazel pulled back, wiping her face, and for the first time Ethan saw a spark of steel beneath the fear. We're not afraid of work, she said firmly. Good, Ethan replied, a faint smile touching his lips. Neither am I. The first week was pure, unadulterated chaos. Ethan had forgotten what it was like to manage a project with no budget, no crew, and makeshift everything. They started with the absolute essentials. Getting the electricity restored was priority number 1, which required calling in favors from old contacts in Portland and doing most of the dangerous rewiring himself. Hazel followed him everywhere, a shadow with 1,000 questions. She was incredible. Why are you using that gauge wire instead of the thinner one? She'd ask, her brow furrowed. Because this circuit is going to carry more load. The refrigerator, a microwave. You always over-engineer when it comes to electrical. Safety first. Makes sense. She'd file the information away, her mind a steel trap, and then hand him the next tool before he even had to ask for it. The girl was a natural. Ivy, meanwhile, focused on the practical, organizational side. She made endless lists of materials, calculated costs down to the penny, and became a master at finding deals at salvage yards and hardware stores. She got a job at the corner cafe in Ashford, waitressing 4 days a week. Hazel, not to be outdone, picked up weekend shifts at Turner's Hardware, which miraculously gave them an employee discount on supplies. Every single dollar went back into the house. Clara, in true 5-year-old fashion, appointed herself project supervisor. She'd sit on an overturned bucket, swinging her small legs, offering serious commentary. Daddy, that board looks crooked. It's supposed to be like that, sweetheart. It's for drainage. Oh, okay. A long pause. But it still looks crooked. The twins were endlessly patient with her endless stream of questions, her need for attention, her innate little girl chaos. Ivy would sit on the floor in the mornings, gently braiding Clara's wild curls. Hazel taught her the names of all the tools and let her help with safe, important tasks like sorting screws and nails into jars. One evening, about 2 weeks in, Ethan came downstairs, aching in every joint, to find Ivy making dinner, while Clara sat at the makeshift counter, chattering about her day. And then Hazel let me use the real hammer, the small one, not the toy one, and I hammered 3 whole nails, all by myself. Clara's eyes were bright with fierce pride. 3 whole nails? Ivy repeated, turning around, her expression perfectly serious. Clara, that is very impressive. You'll be a builder like your dad in no time. That's what Hazel said, Clara beamed. Then her voice grew quieter. Ivy, do you think Mommy would be proud of me? Ethan froze in the doorway. His heart seized. They hadn't talked much about Rebecca. Every time he tried, the words turned to ash in his throat. He didn't know how to navigate his own grief, let alone hers. But Ivy didn't hesitate. She didn't flinch. She set down her wooden spoon, wiped her hands on a rag, and turned to face Clara fully. Oh, sweetheart, I think your mommy would be so proud of you, Ivy said, her voice impossibly gentle. You've been so brave through all these hard changes, and you're learning so much. I bet she would love to see you hammering nails and helping build your new home. Clara nodded slowly, absorbing this. I miss her. I know, sweetheart, Ivy said, her own voice catching. I miss my mom, too. Clara's eyes widened slightly. She died too, right? She did, in October. Clara considered this with a child's profound gravity. Does it get easier? Ivy's eyes glistened, but her voice was steady. It gets different. You don't miss them less, not ever. But it hurts a little less over time, and you find ways to keep them with you. Memories, things they taught you, ways they loved you. Those things stay. Ethan's throat tightened until it ached. He'd been so focused on survival, on keeping Clara fed and sheltered and physically safe, that he hadn't known the first thing about helping her grieve. He hadn't had the words. But Ivy, who was living that same grief, understood in a way he couldn't. Later that night, long after Clara was asleep in the small, clean bedroom they'd made livable first, Ethan found Ivy sitting alone on the dark porch. Thank you, he said, his voice quiet in the night air. For what you said to Clara earlier? Ivy looked up, surprised. You heard that? I did. I've been failing her with that stuff, not knowing what to say, how to help her process it. You haven't been failing her, Ethan, Ivy said, her voice firm. You've been keeping her alive and safe and loved through an impossible situation. That's not failing. That's surviving. She misses her mom. I don't know how to be both parents for her. You don't have to be both parents, Ivy said simply. You just have to be her dad. And you're doing that. You're doing it perfectly. Ethan sat down on the porch steps, the old wood cold beneath him. The night was sharp and clear. Stars were scattered across the black sky like spilled salt. Tell me about your mom, he said, if you want to. So Ivy did. She told him about Susan Vance, the woman who'd raised twins alone and somehow made them feel like they had everything, even when they had nothing. The woman who had worked herself to exhaustion so her daughters could go to college. The woman who'd been so proud when they graduated that she cried through the entire ceremony, embarrassing them both. She was tough, Ivy said, a small smile in her voice, but also soft, you know? She'd work a 12-hour shift at the plant and still come home and make us elaborate birthday cakes from scratch. She taught us that working hard didn't mean you couldn't also be kind. She sounds incredible. She was. Ivy's voice dropped. I keep thinking she'd be horrified that we ended up homeless, like we'd let her down. You didn't let her down, Ivy, Ethan said, his voice rough. You tried to save her. You gave up your jobs, your futures, to take care of her. That's love. That's not failure. They sat in a comfortable, shared silence for a while. Then Ivy asked, "What was your wife like?" Ethan felt the familiar tightness, the fist clenching around his heart. "Rebecca, she was, she was the organized one, the planner. I'd get excited about a restoration project and want to jump in with a sledgehammer, and she'd be the one with the clipboard, making sure we'd actually thought it through." He smiled, a real smile, though it ached. "She was funny, just terrible jokes. But she'd laugh at them herself, this big, wonderful laugh, so hard you couldn't help but laugh too. And she loved Clara so much it terrified her sometimes, really terrified her. She'd say, 'I never knew I could love something this much, Ethan. What if something happens to her? How would I survive?' And I'd tell her nothing was going to happen, that we'd keep her safe." His voice dropped. "Turns out I should have been worrying about keeping Rebecca safe. You couldn't have prevented an aneurysm, Ethan. I know, logically I know that. But there's a part of me, this dark part, that feels like I should have seen it coming, should have done something." "That's grief talking," Ivy said softly. "Not logic. It makes us believe we had more control than we ever did." Ethan looked at her, really looked at her in the faint moonlight, with her guard completely down. She looked younger than 24, but her eyes held an understanding that was ancient. "How'd you get so wise?" he asked. Ivy let out a small laugh. "Trauma and therapy. Mom made us see a counselor after our dad left. Best thing she ever did for us, honestly. Taught us how to process stuff instead of just burying it. Maybe I should try that. Maybe you should." By March, the farmhouse was starting to look less like a ruin and more like an actual home. They'd gotten the plumbing working, which meant hot showers, a luxury so profound that all of them, even Ethan, got emotional the first time they used one. The kitchen was functional, with salvaged cabinets that Hazel had painstakingly refinished and countertops they'd pieced together from discount supplies. 3 bedrooms upstairs were finally warm, dry, and livable. Ethan and Clara in one, Hazel in another, and Ivy in the third. The work was brutal, but there was an undeniable joy in it. They'd put on music while they worked, and sometimes Hazel would sing along. It turned out she had a beautiful, clear voice. Clara would dance while they painted walls or sanded floors, a whirling dervish of unself-conscious enthusiasm that made them all laugh. Ethan felt something fundamental shifting inside himself. He wasn't forgetting Rebecca. He knew he'd never forget her, but it felt like making room. Making room for the present, for the sound of laughter in a house that had been silent for a decade, for the deep satisfaction of building something with his hands again, for the unexpected cobbled-together family that was forming around their shared brokenness. One Saturday in late March, they decided to tackle the disaster that was the backyard. Years of neglect had turned it into an impenetrable jungle of thorns, weeds, and overgrown bushes. Hazel surveyed the chaos with her hands on her hips, a familiar look of determination on her face. "You know what this space needs?" she announced. "A garden." "A garden?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Hazel, we're barely keeping up with the house repairs." I know, but hear me out." Her eyes lit up. "My degree is in agricultural science. I could design a proper vegetable garden. Nothing fancy, just the basics. Tomatoes, lettuce, zucchini, herbs. It would save us a ton of money on groceries. And gardening is therapeutic." She gave him a meaningful look. "We could all use more therapeutic." "Can we grow strawberries?" Clara asked hopefully, appearing from behind a bush. "I really like strawberries." "We can definitely grow strawberries," Hazel promised, winking at her. So they spent the entire day clearing weeds, turning soil, and building raised beds. Hazel was in her element, explaining soil composition and drainage while they worked. Ivy, ever the organizer, took notes, planning out what they'd plant and when. Ethan found himself just watching them work for a minute. The way Hazel's whole face lit up when she talked about cover crops. The way Ivy made even backbreaking manual labor feel structured and achievable. The way Clara absorbed everything like a little sponge. "Daddy, look!" Clara held up a wriggling earthworm. "Hazel says worms are good for gardens because they make the dirt better." "That's right," Ethan confirmed. Worms are very helpful. Everything's helpful if you put it in the right place, Hazel said, wiping sweat from her forehead. Then catching Ethan's eye, she added quietly, I think people too. That night, exhausted and covered in dirt, they ordered pizza, a rare splurge, and ate it sitting on the newly swept porch as the sun set in a blaze of orange and purple. You know what I just realized, Ivy said, holding her slice. 3 months ago, Hazel and I were sleeping in our car, terrified about where we'd end up. Now look at us. We have a home. We have work we're good at. We have... She paused, her voice thick with emotion. We have a family again. Hazel raised her pizza slice in a toast. To second chances and abandoned farmhouses. And to people who see strangers and offer help instead of judgment, Ivy added, looking right at Ethan. Clara held up her juice box solemnly. And to strawberries, they all laughed, and Ethan felt something warm and unfamiliar spread through his chest. It wasn't happiness, not exactly. He wasn't sure he was ready for that word yet, but it was something close, something that felt exactly like hope. Spring rolled into a warm, bright summer, and with it came steady progress on multiple fronts. Ethan's reputation in the local construction world, tarnished by his company's collapse in Portland, started to rebuild. He took on a small but complex restoration project in town, a historic storefront that needed careful, meticulous work. He brought Hazel with him as his apprentice, and she impressed the client so much they asked if she was available for other projects. She's got an eye for it, the client told Ethan, impressed, and she's meticulous. You don't find that much anymore. By June, they had enough work lined up that Ethan officially made Hazel his business partner. She cried when he told her, right there in the hardware store parking lot. You don't have to do this, she said, wiping her eyes. You've already done so much for us. I'm not doing this for you, Hazel, Ethan replied honestly. I'm doing it because you're talented. You work harder than anyone I know, and I'd be stupid not to recognize that. This is business. You've earned it. Ivy's catering side hustle was growing too. It had started small, with her making extra batches of food and selling them at the Ashford Farmers Market. Then someone hired her to cater a small party. Then another. By July, Ivy had regular clients and was seriously considering making it a full-time, legitimate business. I'd need a proper kitchen, though, she said one evening, poring over her finances at the kitchen table. The farmhouse kitchen is great for us, but if I'm going to scale up, I need real commercial space. There's that empty storefront next to the corner cafe, Hazel suggested, not looking up from her book. I saw a for-lease sign last week. They started planning, calculating, dreaming. It wasn't just about money, it was about Ivy reclaiming the future her business degree had promised. Clara turned 6 in August, and they threw her a party in the backyard. The space, once a jungle of thorns, had been transformed by Hazel's garden into something magical. Kids from Clara's kindergarten class came, and their parents stayed, charmed and moved by the unconventional household and the palpable, obvious love that held it all together. Ethan stood at the edge of the yard, a plastic cup of lemonade in his hand, watching Clara lead a chaotic game of tag. Her laughter was bright, effortless, and unself-conscious, the sound of a child who felt completely safe. She's thriving, Ivy said quietly, appearing at his elbow. He nodded, his throat tight. She is, because of you and Hazel. The way you both just stepped into her life and loved her without hesitation. It wasn't hard to love her, Ethan. She's incredible. She is, Ethan agreed. Then before he could stop himself, the words came out. So are you. Ivy turned to look at him, her smile fading into surprise and something else, something warmer stirring in her eyes. Ethan felt his face heat up, a flush creeping up his neck. I just mean, he stammered, you're good with her. You've been good for both of us. I don't know how to thank you properly. You already did, Ivy said softly, her gaze unwavering. You gave us a home when we had nothing. You can't outthank that, Ethan. They stood there, the sounds of children shrieking with laughter and summer insects buzzing around them, and a new kind of quiet, the quiet, terrifying hum of possibility hung in the air between them. Later that night, after all the guests had left and Clara had crashed hard from sugar and excitement, Ethan found Hazel sitting on the porch steps, staring up at the stars. "Need some company?" he asked. "Always." She patted the step beside her. They sat in the comfortable silence they had perfected over months of shared labor. Then Hazel said, without preamble, "You should tell her." Ethan's stomach dropped. "Tell who what?" "Ivy, that you have feelings for her." Hazel smiled at his panicked, deer-in-the-headlights expression. "Don't look so terrified. I'm not mad about it. And please, I'm her twin. I notice everything." He swallowed but couldn't form a denial. "And for what it's worth," Hazel continued gently, "she feels the same way." "She does." The hope in his voice was raw, embarrassing. "She does, but she's too scared to say anything because she doesn't want to mess this up. What we have here, this household, this family, and it means everything to her, to both of us. She would rather swallow her feelings whole than risk losing this." What if acting on it does mess things up?" Ethan whispered, voicing his own deepest fear. Hazel turned to look at him directly, her expression serious in the moonlight. "What if it makes things better? Ethan, you gave us our lives back. You didn't have to do that. You chose to, when you could have easily and justifiably called the cops that first night. You saw two desperate, terrified people and decided to help instead of punish. That says everything about who you are." "I was desperate too," he deflected. "I recognized it." "Exactly. You understood what we needed because you needed the same thing. And we built something real here. Something good. Don't you think you deserve to have something good for yourself too?" Ethan thought about Rebecca. He thought about the crushing guilt he still carried, the feeling that moving on was a betrayal. He thought about whether it was too soon, or if there even was a right time for these things. "I don't know if I'm ready," he admitted, the words tasting like failure. "That's fair." Hazel's voice was kind. "But maybe ask yourself, will you ever feel completely ready? Or is there always going to be some reason to wait?" She stood up, stretching her arms over her head. "Just think about it. And for what it's worth, Rebecca sounds like she was amazing. But I don't think amazing people want the people they loved to be alone forever." She went inside, leaving Ethan alone with his thoughts and the chirping crickets. 2 days later, Ethan found Ivy in the kitchen late at night. She was surrounded by a chaotic mess of mixing bowls, flour sacks, and handwritten notes. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "Too many ideas bouncing around." She gestured at the chaos. "I'm trying to perfect this herb focaccia for a client. Want to be my taste tester?" "Always." She cut him a piece of bread, still warm from the oven. It was incredible. Crispy on the outside, light and fluffy on the inside, infused with rosemary and coarse sea salt. "This is, Ivy, this is amazing," Ethan said honestly. "You think?" She looked pleased, a little flushed from the heat. "I've been working on it for weeks. It's perfect. Your clients are lucky." They fell into the easy, comfortable conversation that had become so natural between them, talking about her business plans, Clara's upcoming first day of school, a new restoration project Ethan was bidding on. Then Ivy's hands stilled. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Do you think you'll ever, do you think you could ever—" She stopped, frustrated with herself, her face falling. "Never mind, it's not my business." "Ivy," Ethan set down the last piece of bread. His heart was pounding, a heavy thud against his ribs, but Hazel's words echoed in his head. "What were you going to ask?" She took a deep breath. "Do you think you could ever be open to having someone in your life again? In a romantic way, I mean. Or is that something that feels impossible after losing Rebecca?" The question hung between them, vulnerable and terrifying. Ethan could have deflected. He could have given a safe, vague answer. But looking at Ivy, this woman who had been nothing but vulnerable and honest with him from the start, who had helped his daughter grieve, who had become so essential to his daily life, he chose honesty instead. "6 months ago," he said carefully, "I would have said impossible. I couldn't imagine feeling anything but grief for the rest of my life." He met her eyes, which were wide and searching. "But lately I've realized that grief doesn't mean you stop living. And maybe Rebecca would want me to keep living. Really living, not just surviving. She sounds like she was a wonderful person. She was, he confirmed, the memory bringing a dull ache, not a sharp pain. But she's gone. And I'm still here. And so is Clara. We deserve to move forward. That doesn't mean forgetting. It just means making room for new things, alongside the memories. Ivy nodded slowly, her eyes shining. When my mom died, someone told me that the people we love don't want us to stay frozen in our grief. They want us to take all the love they gave us and use it to build new lives. I didn't believe it at first, but I think it's true. I think so too. The kitchen was quiet except for the old clock ticking on the wall. Then Ivy said so softly he almost missed it. I have feelings for you, Ethan. I have for a while. But I didn't want to say anything because I was so afraid it would ruin everything. This household, this family we've built, it's too important to risk. Ethan's heart felt too big for his chest. He echoed Hazel's words back to her. What if it doesn't ruin it? What if it makes it better? You really think that's possible? She whispered. Instead of answering with words, Ethan reached across the counter and took her hand. Her fingers were dusted with flour and warm from working. I think you're one of the best people I've ever met, Ivy Vance. I think you walked into my life. Literally, you were already here. At the exact moment I needed someone who understood what loss felt like. I think Clara adores you. I think you're building something incredible with your business. And I think I'd be an idiot not to see what we could be together. Ivy's eyes filled with tears. I'm scared. Me too, he admitted, squeezing her hand. But maybe we can be scared together. Take it slow, see what happens. But at least be honest about what we're feeling. She squeezed his hand back. I'd like that. I'd like that a lot. They stayed like that for a long moment, hands clasped over a counter covered in flour and recipe notes, in a kitchen in a farmhouse neither of them had ever planned to call home. So, Ivy said eventually, a watery smile breaking through. Want to help me finish this focaccia? I have 3 more variations to try. Ethan laughed, a real, light laugh. I can't think of anything I'd rather do. The rest of the summer and into the fall felt like a different life, a different world from the one Ethan had been living just a year ago. His relationship with Ivy developed slowly, carefully. They went on actual dates, dinner in town, a movie, a long hike in the state park. They held hands on the porch after Clara went to bed. They talked. They really talked. About their fears and hopes, their pasts and their potential futures. Clara noticed, of course. Nothing got past her. Are you and Ivy boyfriend and girlfriend now? She asked one morning at breakfast, as casual as discussing the weather. Ethan nearly choked on his coffee. We care about each other very much. Is that okay with you? Clara considered this with all the seriousness of a 6-year-old. Does it mean she's staying forever? Would you want her to stay forever? Yeah, Clara nodded. She makes really good pancakes, and she helps me with my hair, and she doesn't get mad when I ask too many questions. She took a thoughtful bite of cereal. Plus, she makes you smile more. You didn't smile much before. Out of the mouths of children, Ethan thought, his heart aching. Then yes, sweetheart. If she wants to stay forever, she can. Good, Clara said, satisfied. Can I have more orange juice? By October, exactly 1 year after Ivy and Hazel's mother had died, the businesses were thriving enough that they started looking at real houses in Ashford. The farmhouse had served its purpose, but winter was coming, and the heating situation was marginal at best. They found a place in town. It was nothing fancy, but it was solid, winterized with proper insulation, and had 4 bedrooms. Most importantly, it had a big, bright kitchen for Ivy's catering, a 2-car garage for Ethan's tools, and a backyard with perfect sun for Hazel's garden projects. Are you sure about this? Hazel asked as they toured the empty house. Leaving the farmhouse? We're not leaving it, Ethan said, looking at Ivy. We're moving forward from it. There's a difference. They moved in November, and somehow the transition felt completely natural. This new house was warmer, more practical, but it carried the same sense of family they'd forged in the farmhouse. Hazel met someone, Mark, a kind, patient teacher at Clara's school who actually laughed at her terrible puns. The first time he came to dinner, Ethan watched Hazel's face light up and thought, "Good, she deserves this." Clara started first grade and flourished. She'd tell everyone about my dad and my Hazel and my Ivy with such confidence, such certainty, that no one ever questioned the unconventional arrangement. On December 20th, exactly 1 year after Ethan had bought the farmhouse, they all drove out to see it. The grass had grown wild again. The windows were still covered with the same cardboard and plastic from that first night, but it stood solid, waiting. "Should we sell it?" Ivy asked from the passenger seat, slipping her hand into his. Ethan thought about the question. He thought about the terrified young women he had found inside. He thought about the split-second decision to help instead of punish, about everything that had grown from that single, illogical choice. "Not yet," he said. "Maybe someone else will need it someday. Someone like we were. Desperate, broke, trying to rebuild. Let it be there for them." "That's beautiful," Hazel said from the back seat, where she sat next to Clara. "Daddy?" Clara's voice was thoughtful. "That's where we became a family, right? In that house." Ethan met Ivy's eyes, and in them, he saw his own emotions reflected back. Gratitude, wonder, love. "Yes, sweetheart," he said, his voice thick. "That's exactly where we became a family. Even though it was an accident? Even though you didn't know Hazel and Ivy would be there?" "Especially because of that," Ethan said. "Sometimes the best things in life aren't planned. Sometimes you just have to walk through the door and see who's waiting on the other side." In January 2025, Ethan and Ivy got married in a small, quiet ceremony at the town hall. Hazel was the maid of honor. Clara was the flower girl and took her job very seriously, scattering petals with an intense concentration that made everyone laugh. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was better than that. It was real, built on a foundation of shared trauma and hard work and the conscious choice to keep showing up for each other every single day. Hazel and Mark got engaged in March. They talked about staying in Ashford, about building something together, the way her sister had. The businesses continued to grow. Shaw and Vance Restoration had a reputation now. Quality work, fair prices, meticulous attention to detail. Ivy's catering operation, the Juniper Kitchen, had a waiting list of clients. They were building something real, something lasting. One evening in late March, almost exactly 2 years after that first night, Ethan found himself on the porch of their proper house in town. Ivy sat beside him, her hand in his. Through the living room window, they could see Hazel and Mark playing a board game with Clara. All three of them were laughing at something. "You ever think about how different things could have been?" Ivy asked quietly. "If you'd called the police that night? If you'd told us to leave?" "Sometimes," Ethan admitted, "but I try not to. What's the point? This is where we are. This is what we built. We built something pretty amazing." "We did." They sat in that comfortable, deep silence, the kind that comes from truly knowing someone. Then Ivy said, "Thank you for seeing us that night, when you could have just seen trespassers." Ethan squeezed her hand. "Thank you for being brave enough to still be there when I arrived, for not running before I pulled up." Ivy laughed softly. "Where would we have run to exactly? We all needed each other, even if we didn't know it yet." Inside, Clara's laughter rang out, bright and joyful. She was 7 now, tall and confident, with her mother's curiosity and her father's determination. She had Hazel teaching her carpentry and Ivy teaching her to cook. She had a father who'd walk through fire and come out the other side, still capable of love. She had a family she didn't question, because love to her was just what you did for the people who mattered. Have you ever experienced a moment that changed everything? A decision that seemed small at the time, but ended up reshaping your entire life? Sometimes the people we're meant to find aren't the ones we go looking for. They're the ones already waiting in the places we're brave enough to call home. If this story touched you, if you believe in second chances and the families we build from broken pieces, leave a comment below. Tell me about a time someone saw you when you needed it most, or when you chose compassion over judgment. And if you're still watching, thank you. Subscribe for more stories about the unexpected ways we find each other and the courage it takes to rebuild. Because sometimes the best homes aren't the ones we plan for. They're the ones we discover when we're brave enough to walk through the door.